I've watched enough folks go through hard times to know one thing for certain. The moments that break a man don't usually come with thunder and lightning. They come quiet, early in the morning, when nobody's around to see. That's when the real weight settles in. And that's exactly how it happened, on a Kansas ranch in the spring of 1886. 7. Daniel Carver counted them again, squinting against the pale dawn. 7 cattle standing where 23 had grazed 6 months before. The youngest heifer lay on her side, near the dry trough, ribs pressing through her hide like fingers beneath a bedsheet. He walked toward her. His boots cracked the earth with each step soil that should have been soft, should have held moisture, should have kept his father's legacy alive. The heifer's eye rolled toward him, brown, wet, asking something he couldn't answer. Daniel crouched beside her. His hand found her neck, felt the weak pulse fluttering beneath the skin. "Easy, girl." The words came out rough. He hadn't spoken to another living thing in 4 days. Behind him, the cabin sat dark and silent. No lamp in the window, no smoke from the chimney, no reason for either. If this story finds you today, I'd love to know where you're listening from. And if you've been enjoying these tales without subscribing, I'd be grateful if you'd consider joining our little community. The stagecoach lurched over another rut, and Clara's teeth clicked together. She tasted dust. Had been tasting it for 3 days now, grit between her molars, coating her tongue, settling into the creases of her palms. The other passengers slept. A drummer from St. Louis with his sample case clutched to his chest. A woman in black who hadn't spoken since Topeka. Clara envied neither of them. Her carpet bag sat heavy on her lap. Her fingers stayed wrapped around the handles, knuckles white beneath the road dust. The wooden chest rode at her feet, brass hinges worn smooth from years of opening and closing. She felt its weight against her ankles with every jolt of the wheels. Through the window, Kansas stretched flat and endless. The grass had gone the color of old rope. No trees, no shade. Just sky pressing down on earth like a hand on a chest. Clara's left hand ached. She rubbed the base of her ring finger without thinking the pale band of skin where gold used to sit. 2 years now. The tan line should have faded. It hadn't. Miller's Crossing. The driver's voice cut through the rattle. "End of the line." The coach shuddered to a stop. Clara's stomach dropped the way it always did at the end of a journey. New place, new name to learn, new reasons to leave. She gathered her things and stepped down into the afternoon glare. A man stood beside a buckboard 20 feet away. Tall, thin in the wrong way, not lean, but worn down. His hat had sweat stains ringing the brim in layers, like tree rings marking hard years. His shirt might have been blue once. Their eyes met. Clara had expected him to look desperate. They always did. The men who sent for women through agencies. But Daniel Carver's face held something else, something she recognized from mirrors. He didn't move toward her, didn't smile, just waited. She walked to him, carpet bag in one hand, the chest's rope handle cutting into the other. "Mr. Carver, ma'am." Silence. The wind pushed a tumbleweed past the buckboard's wheel. Clara looked past him, toward the horizon. The land out there lay brown and cracked, but her eyes caught something else, a patch of green-gray near the road, low to the ground. Feathery leaves, wild yarrow, growing where nothing else would. She filed it away, said nothing. But her hands had stopped shaking for the first time in 3 days. The buckboard wheels squeaked with every rotation. Daniel had meant to grease it last week. Hadn't gotten around to it. Hadn't gotten around to much of anything lately. Clara sat beside him, her carpet bag wedged between her feet, that wooden chest balanced on her knees. She hadn't spoken since they left Miller's Crossing. Neither had he. The silence sat between them like a third passenger. The road curved around a low ridge, and the ranch came into view. Daniel's hands tightened on the reins. From here, a man could see everything wrong. The brown pastures where green should have been, the empty corrals, the cabin with its peeling whitewash and sagging porch roof he kept promising to fix. He pulled the buckboard to a stop near the barn. The wheels creaked. Dust settled. "This is it," he said. The words came out flat. Clara climbed down without waiting for help. Her boots hit the packed dirt, and she stood there, turning slowly, taking in the whole sorry picture. Daniel watched her face for the thing he expected, the pinched mouth, the quick calculation of how fast she could get back to that stagecoach. It didn't come. "Show me," she said. He showed her. They walked the south pasture first. 7 cattle stood in a loose cluster near the dry creek bed, their hip bones jutting beneath dull hides. The youngest heifer, the one he'd found that morning, lay in the same spot, still breathing, barely. Clara crouched beside her. Her hands moved over the animal's body with a sureness that made Daniel step back. She checked the gums, pulling the lip up to examine the color. She ran her fingers along the hooves, pressing at the quick. She lifted the tail and studied what she found there. How long she'd been down? 3 days, maybe 4. Clara nodded, said nothing, moved on. They walked to the well. Daniel drew up a bucket and held it for her to see. The water had a yellowish tint, sediment swirling at the bottom. "Started going bad 2 months ago," he said. "Used to run clear." Clara dipped her finger in, brought it to her lips, tasted, her nose wrinkled. "Sulfur. Don't know what it is, just know it ain't right." She set the bucket down and walked to the nearest field. 40 acres of cracked earth, where winter wheat should have been pushing up by now. She crouched again, scooped a handful of soil, crumbled it between her fingers, brought it to her nose, and inhaled. Daniel watched her. The late afternoon sun threw her shadow long across the dead ground. "When did you last let this field rest?" He didn't understand the question. Rest. Leave it fallow. Let it sit a season without planting. Never. He pushed his hat back, wiped sweat from his forehead. "Can't afford to. Need every acre producing just to break even." Clara stood, brushed the dirt from her hands. Her face gave nothing away. "I can get you a ticket back," Daniel said. The words came out before he could stop them. "Wouldn't blame you none. This ain't what I promised in that letter." She looked at him then, really looked. The way she'd looked at the sick heifer and the bad water and the dying soil. "Mr. Carver, I've seen land that couldn't be saved. This ain't that." They ate supper as the last light bled out of the sky. Salt pork and cornbread, fried in a cast iron skillet, black with years of use. Daniel had trimmed the lamp wick short, saving oil, and the kitchen sat in half darkness. Clara ate slowly, her eyes moving around the room, taking inventory, the empty shelf where Ruth's good dishes used to sit, the chair by the window that nobody used anymore, the dust on the mantel where a photograph had been. "The man who owned this land before you," she said. "What happened to him?" Daniel set down his fork, took what he wanted, left when there was nothing left to take. How long did he work it? 12 years, maybe 15? Clara nodded. She picked up her cornbread, broke it in half, set one piece aside. "That's what's wrong. Then, ground remembers what you do to it. You take and take without giving back. Eventually, it stops giving altogether. You talk like the dirt's alive. It is." She said it simple, like stating the color of the sky. "Every handful's got more creatures in it than people in Kansas. They die. The soil dies. Soil dies. Everything on it follows." Daniel stared at her. The lamp flame guttered, shadows jumping across her face. "Where'd you learn all that?" "My grandmother. She was a healer back in Virginia. Knew things about land and animals that most folks have forgotten." Clara paused. "She's gone now." The silence stretched. Outside, a coyote called somewhere in the darkness. Another answered. "I'd like to try something," Clara said. "With the land, with the cattle. I can't promise it'll work, but I've seen it work before." "What kind of something? Let me show you tomorrow. If you don't like what you see, I'll take that ticket back to wherever you want to send me." Daniel looked at her across the table. Her hands rested on either side of her plate, rough hands, calloused at the palms, dirt still visible under 2 fingernails. Not the hands of a woman who expected someone else to do the hard work. "Ain't much of a supper," he said. "Ain't much of a complaint." He almost smiled, caught himself. "You always talk like that." "Like what?" "Like you mean it." Clara's mouth twitched. "Only way I know how." She helped him clear the dishes. Their shoulders brushed once, reaching for the same cup. Neither mentioned it. Later, Daniel lay in his bed in the back room, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't see. The cabin had gone full dark. The lamp extinguished to save oil. Through the thin wall, he could hear Clara moving around the creak of the cot, the click of that wooden chest opening. He thought about her hands in the dirt, the way she'd smelled it like she was reading something written there. Not soft, not afraid. He closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept circling back to one thing she'd said, turning it over like a stone in his palm. Ground remembers what you do to it. What else? He wondered. Did that wooden chest hold that she wasn't showing him? Clara woke before the first light touched the window. She lay still on the narrow cot, listening. The cabin creaked in the pre-dawn cool. Somewhere outside, a mockingbird ran through its repertoire. 3 notes. Pause. 3 different notes. Pause. The air smelled of dust and old wood and the faint ghost of last night's salt pork. Her feet found the floor. The boards were cold through her stockings. She dressed in the dark, fingers working buttons by memory. Her grandmother's journal sat on the chest where she'd left it leather-bound, the initials E.M.H. stamped in gold on the cover. Not her initials, never would be. Clara tucked it into her apron pocket and slipped out the door. The sky had gone pale gray at the eastern edge, stars fading one by one. She walked the property alone, her boots leaving dark prints in the dew-wet grass. The journal came out, a pencil stub, sharpened with her pocket knife the night before. She started with the south pasture. The soil here was compacted, drainage poor, signs of overgrazing going back years. The grass that remained grew in patches, struggling up through hardpan that should have been loose and dark. She crouched, pulled a handful of earth, rubbed it between her fingers. Too much clay, not enough organic matter. The soil crumbled wrong in chunks instead of the fine tilth that held water and let roots breathe. Clara pulled a cloth pouch from her pocket and filled it, labeled it with the pencil, moved on. By mid-morning, she had covered the creek bed, the north field, and the fence line along the western boundary. The dry creek showed remnants of an old beaver dam abandoned, the sticks gray and brittle. Without water pooling, nothing seeped into the surrounding ground. She wrote that down too. Near the fence, she found what she'd been looking for: wild comfrey, growing in a tangle where the soil had been left alone. The leaves were thick and rough, covered in fine hairs that caught the light. She dug up 3 plants with her fingers, careful to keep the roots intact, and wrapped them in a damp cloth. Daniel was at the well when she returned, hauling up a bucket. He saw the journal, the pouches, the comfrey plants dangling from her fist. "You been up long." "A while." He set the bucket down, waited. Clara spread her findings on the porch rail. Soil samples lined up left to right, lightest to darkest. The pressed plants laid out below them. "Your land's not dying," she said. "It's exhausted. There's a difference." Daniel crossed his arms. "Go on. The man before you took everything out and put nothing back. Planted the same crops year after year, same fields, no rotation. Let the cattle graze down to bare dirt. Cut the timber for fencing without leaving windbreaks." She pointed to the soil samples. "See how these get darker as you move away from the main fields. That's what your soil should look like everywhere. It's still there, underneath, just buried." "How do you fix buried?" Clara picked up one of the comfrey plants. The roots hung down, pale and thick. "You let the land rest. Plant things that give back instead of just taking." Comfrey pulls poison from the soil, takes it into itself so the ground can breathe again. Clover fixes nitrogen. Deep-rooted plants break up that hardpan. Let water drain proper. She walked to the pasture fence and knelt. Her fingers dug into the hard earth, working a hole big enough for the comfrey's roots. She tamped the soil around it, firm but not too tight. "And the cattle?" Daniel asked. "I'll show you." The sick heifer still lay where they'd left her, but her eye tracked them as they approached, more alert than yesterday. Clara opened her grandmother's chest and pulled out a glass jar filled with dried flowers, yarrow, chamomile, a few leaves of plantain. She mixed the herbs with water from the bucket, crushing them with a white marble mortar and pestle that had traveled with her from Virginia. The paste smelled sharp and green, like summer fields after rain. "Hold her head," Clara said. Daniel knelt and cradled the heifer's skull in his lap. Clara worked the paste into the animal's mouth, rubbing it along the gums, making sure she swallowed. What's that supposed to do? Settle her stomach. Fight the infection. Give her body a chance to remember how to heal itself. A horse snorted behind them. Clara turned to find a man on a gray mare, reins loose, watching from the fence line. Tobacco juice stained his beard. His eyes moved from Clara to Daniel to the heifer and back. Carver, didn't know you had company. Silas, Daniel stood, brushing dirt from his knees. This is Clara. She came in on last week's stage. Silas Cobb looked at her, the way men looked at things they didn't understand. His gaze dropped to the mortar and pestle, the jar of herbs, the comfrey seedlings lined up along the fence. Lady, that cow's half dead already. You're wasting good medicine on a lost cause. Clara wiped her hands on her apron, met his eyes. Then she's half alive. Mr. Cobb, I've worked with worse odds. Silas grunted, spat tobacco juice into the dust, rode off without another word. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of work. Clara mixed tonics each morning, treated the heifer twice daily, planted more comfrey along the fence lines. Daniel watched without interfering, asked questions sometimes, mostly just handed her tools before she could ask for them. On the fourth day, the heifer moved. Clara saw it first, the twitch of the back legs, the shift of weight. Then the animal was struggling up, front legs bracing, hindquarters rising in a lurch that sent Daniel stepping back. The heifer stood, swayed, found her balance. She walked 3 steps to the water trough, lowered her head, drank. Clara's hands went still on the fence rail. She watched the heifer drink long, steady pulls, water dripping from her muzzle. The animal that had been dying 4 days ago now stood on her own legs, choosing to live, planning for next week. The thought arrived without permission. Which fields to rest first? How to rebuild the beaver dam? Where to plant the clover? She was making plans. Her fingers found the bare spot on her ring finger. The skin there had finally started to match the rest of her hand. What would happen, she wondered, if she stayed long enough for it to disappear completely? Daniel woke to the smell of coffee. He lay still for a moment, confused. The cabin was still dark, the first gray of dawn barely touching the window, but the scent was unmistakable, strong and bitter, the way his father used to make it. He found Clara at the stove, stirring a pot of oats. 2 tin cups sat on the table, 2 plates, 2 spoons. Didn't mean to wake you, she said without turning. You didn't, but something had. Something about the smell of coffee made for 2. The sound of another person moving through the cabin. He couldn't remember the last time he'd woken to anything but silence. They ate quickly, standing at the counter. The oats were plain, no sugar, no milk, but hot and filling. Clara had added a pinch of salt. Ruth used to do the same thing. Daniel pushed the thought away before it could settle. 5 weeks had brought changes he was still learning to see. The south pasture, left fallow as Clara insisted, had started to show patches of new growth. Not much, just clover seedlings pushing up through the cracks, but enough to notice. The cattle had been moved to the north field, where the grass still held some strength. They looked better, moved easier. The heifer that had nearly died now grazed with the others, thin but standing. Today's work was fencing. Daniel had sold 2 of the remaining cattle to pay for the new barbed wire, shipped from Wichita, still shiny and sharp. Neither of them had worked with it before. By noon, they'd both have the cuts to prove it. They started at the northeast corner, where the old fence had rotted through. Daniel drove the post hole digger into the earth, lifted, twisted, pulled out a plug of soil, again. The rhythm came back to him, the work his body remembered, even when his mind wandered. Clara stretched wire between the posts, pulling it taut with leather gloves that were already stained with rust. She moved with economy, no wasted motion. Her hands sure on the metal. "Hold this end," she said. Daniel took the wire. Their fingers brushed. He noticed, said nothing, and hammered in the staple. They worked through the morning without much talk. Didn't need it. Their rhythms had fallen into sync somewhere in the past week. She anticipated when he'd need the hammer. He knew when to brace the post before she asked. Around midday, Clara straightened and pressed her hand to her left shoulder. A small motion, quickly hidden. Daniel had seen her do it before when she lifted the water bucket, when she reached for something on a high shelf. An old injury, maybe. She never mentioned it. He never asked. "Break," he said instead. "Few more posts first." They finished the line and moved to the dry creek bed, where the fence needed to cross. Solomon the mule stood hitched to the supply cart on the far side, ears flat, refusing to budge. "Come on, you stubborn fool." Daniel pulled the lead rope. Solomon planted his hooves and leaned back. Clara walked past him, slow and easy. She put her hand on the mule's neck and leaned close to his ear. "I know," she said. Quiet. "Creek beds are tricky. Water used to run here, and you can still smell it. Makes you nervous, but it's dry now. See? Nothing to worry about." Solomon's ears twitched forward. He snorted once, then stepped across the creek bed and kept walking like he'd never hesitated at all. Daniel stared. "That mule's smarter than he lets on." Clara scratched behind Solomon's ear. "Don't I know it? Bought him off a preacher who said he was touched by God. Touched by something." Clara's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. "You're not wrong." They ate dinner as the sun dropped low. Cornbread and beans, cooked together in the same pot to save washing. Clara had found wild onions near the creek bed and added them to the beans. The smell filled the cabin, rich and savory. Daniel dragged the second chair onto the porch without thinking about it. He'd made that chair 3 years ago, after Ruth died. Never sat in it, never had reason to. Clara settled into it like she'd been sitting there for years. Her boots were dusty, her hands still marked with wire cuts. She held her coffee cup with both palms, watching the light fade from the sky. "My brother used to say sunsets in Kansas looked like God spilled his paint box." Her voice was soft, distant. Daniel waited. She'd mentioned a brother before once, briefly, and then gone quiet. Same pattern now. "He's still in Virginia." Clara's hands tightened on the cup. "No." She didn't say where he was. Daniel let it pass. The fireflies came out as the darkness deepened, blinking their cold light across the pasture. The smell of cooling earth rose around them, mineral and green, cleaner than it had been a month ago. The well water came up clearer now too. The ground was remembering how to filter. "That chair's comfortable," Clara said. "Made it myself. Oak from a tree my father planted. He'd be proud of it." Daniel looked at her, the profile outlined against the last orange glow of the horizon, the loose strands of hair that had escaped her pins. The way she held herself like a person who'd learned to take up less space than she deserved. The question rose before he could stop it. The ring that wasn't on her finger, the brother she wouldn't talk about, the wooden chest she kept locked. He opened his mouth to ask, closed it. The lamp inside had burned low, the flame guttering against the glass. Neither of them moved to refill it. Neither of them moved at all. Ruth would have liked her. The thought arrived without warning, and Daniel braced for the pain that usually followed, the hollow ache in his chest, the guilt that came with noticing another woman's hands, another woman's voice. It didn't come. He sat with that absence, turning it over like a stone pulled from the creek bed, smooth where it should have been rough, light where it should have been heavy. "Getting late," Clara said finally. "It is." Still, another minute passed before either of them stood. That night, Daniel lay awake in the dark, listening to the cabin settle around him. Through the thin wall, he heard Clara's cot creak as she shifted, then the click of that wooden chest opening. What was she looking for in there, night after night, and why? After 5 weeks. Was he only now realizing he wanted to know? 9 weeks. Clara stood at the edge of the south pasture, her boots sinking into soil that actually gave beneath her weight. The ground here had changed. Not completely, that would take seasons. Maybe years, but enough. Clover spread in patches across the fallow field, low and green against the brown. The comfrey along the fence line had taken hold, leaves broad and rough, roots reaching deep. The cattle moved through the north pasture with purpose now, grazing instead of standing still. The heifer that had nearly died had filled out, her coat showing the first hints of shine. Clara counted them every morning. Still 7, but 7 living, not 7 waiting to die. Word had spread about the Carver Ranch. Some folks called it luck. Others whispered about the strange woman and her remedies. Clara had heard both versions when she'd gone to Miller's Crossing for salt last week. The storekeeper's wife had watched her with narrow eyes. The blacksmith had tipped his hat and smiled. She didn't know which reaction bothered her more. A rider appeared on the ridge road, and Clara shaded her eyes against the morning sun. Not Silas Cobb, this horse was black, well fed, the rider sitting straight in the saddle. As he drew closer, she recognized the dark coat and white collar. The pastor. Clara's stomach tightened. Reverend Hollis stopped his horse at the fence and dismounted with the ease of a man who spent more time riding between farms than standing in pulpits. He was younger than Clara had expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and dust on his boots. "Mrs. Carver, it's Miss..." The correction came out sharper than she'd intended. Clara, just Clara. If the Reverend noticed her tone, he didn't show it. "I've been meaning to ride out here for weeks. Heard good things about what you and Daniel have been doing with the land." Clara wiped her hands on her apron. "It's slow work. The best work usually is." He glanced around the property, the new fence posts, the recovering pasture, the herb garden she'd planted behind the cabin. "Folks have been asking about you two, wondering when you might come to Sunday service. Together. The word hung in the air between them. I appreciate the invitation, Reverend, but there's a lot of work here that can't wait. The Lord rested on the seventh day. Miss Clara, the Lord didn't have dying cattle and exhausted soil. Reverend Hollis smiled, not offended, just patient. The smile of a man who'd heard every excuse and would wait them all out. The invitation stands. Whenever you're ready. He mounted his horse, tipped his hat, and rode back toward the ridge. Clara watched him go until he disappeared over the rise. The church bells would ring on Sunday. She'd hear them from here. 3 miles wasn't far enough to escape that sound. She turned and walked back to the cabin. Inside, the air was close and warm. Clara crossed to her cot in the corner and knelt beside the wooden chest. The brass hinges creaked as she lifted the lid. The dried herbs sat on top, organized in glass jars and cloth pouches. She'd used half of them already: yarrow for the cattle, chamomile for Daniel's sleepless nights, comfrey root for the poultice she'd made when he'd cut his hand on the barbed wire. Beneath the herbs, wrapped in a piece of muslin, lay the daguerreotype. Clara's fingers hovered over it. She could feel its weight without touching it, the small rectangle of silver and glass that held everything she'd lost. She didn't turn it over. Instead, she closed the chest, stood, and walked back outside. Daniel wasn't in the barn where she'd left him. His horse was gone. The buckboard, too. Clara frowned, scanning the property, and that's when she noticed the cabin wall. A window. Where solid wood had been that morning, there was now a rectangle of glass, fitted into a new frame, the edges sealed with pitch. Newspaper wrapping lay crumpled on the ground beneath it, the Wichita Eagle. Dated April 1886, the ink still sharp. Clara walked closer, touched the glass. It was smooth and clean, without the bubbles and waves of cheap window panes. This was quality glass. Expensive glass. The cabin had been dark inside since she'd arrived. One small window in the kitchen, clouded with age, letting in barely enough light to cook by. She'd never said anything about it, never complained. But Daniel had noticed. Hoofbeats sounded from the road. Clara turned to see the buckboard coming over the ridge. Daniel driving. Solomon pulling the load with his usual reluctant stride. He pulled up near the barn and climbed down. His eyes found hers, then moved to the window. Cabin was too dark, he said. Like it was nothing. Like he hadn't ridden to Wichita and back, a full day's journey to buy glass and install it while she was working in the fields. Clara's throat tightened. You didn't have to do that? I know. She walked toward him. He walked toward her. They met at the well, and when Clara reached for the water bucket, Daniel reached for it at the same moment. Their hands touched. Neither pulled away. Clara looked up at him. The late afternoon sun threw shadows across his face, catching the gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes. He was watching her the way he watched the land now, like something worth paying attention to. Thank you, she said. For the window. You're welcome. Still, neither moved. A meadowlark called from the fence post. The cattle lowed in the distance. The world kept turning around them. And Clara stood frozen at the well with Daniel's hand warm against hers. Finally, she stepped back, lifted the bucket, carried it to the cabin without looking at him again. That night, Clara lay on her cot and stared at the ceiling. She could actually see. Moonlight poured through the new window, silver and soft, painting shadows on the walls. She'd never slept in a room this bright. Every place she'd stayed for the past 2 years had been dark rented rooms, boarding houses, the corners of strangers' homes. On the windowsill, a jar of wildflowers caught the light. Purple coneflower and black-eyed Susan, arranged with the careful clumsiness of someone who'd never arranged flowers before. Clara hadn't asked who picked them. She already knew. She rolled onto her side, facing the wall, but she couldn't escape the moonlight. It followed her, painting silver stripes across her blanket, her arm, her hand. If I stay, she thought, I'll have something to lose. She hadn't had that in 2 years, hadn't let herself have it. The wooden chest sat at the foot of her cot, solid and dark. Inside it, the photograph waited. Thomas and William, their faces hidden against the muslin, frozen in a moment before the fever came. Clara closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. And when the first light of dawn touched the new window glass, she was still awake, still staring, still wondering if she was brave enough to stay or smart enough to run. Daniel woke to silence. Not the ordinary silence of a sleeping cabin. This was different, emptier. He lay still, listening. No creak of the cot through the wall, no soft breathing. He pulled on his boots without lacing them and pushed open the door to Clara's room. The cot sat empty, blankets thrown back. The wooden chest was gone. His stomach dropped. The front door stood ajar. A sliver of moonlight cutting across the floor. Daniel grabbed the lantern from the kitchen table and stepped out into the night. The sky had gone to ink, stars scattered thick as spilled salt. No wind. The grass stood motionless, silver-tipped in the pale light. He scanned the yard, the pastures, the dark bulk of the barn. A faint glow leaked through the barn's slat walls. He found her in the back stall, the one they used for storage. She sat on the dirt floor, her back against a hay bale, the wooden chest open beside her. A lantern burned low at her feet, the flame barely a whisper behind cracked glass. Clara didn't look up when he entered. Her shoulders were shaking, not sobs smaller than that. Tremors that moved through her body like ripples in still water. In her lap, a photograph. Face up this time. Daniel stopped 3 feet away, set his lantern on a barrel, lowered himself onto another hay bale without a word. The silence stretched. Outside, an owl called once and didn't call again. The horses shifted in their stalls, hooves scraping softly against packed earth. Clara's voice came thin and cracked. I had a husband. Daniel didn't move. His name was Thomas. We had a boy, William. Her fingers traced the edge of the photograph. He was 4 years old when the fever came through. She stopped. Her throat worked, but no sound came out. Daniel waited. The lantern flame guttered, throwing shadows that jumped and settled. I tried everything my grandmother taught me. Yarrow for the fever, elderflower for the sweats. I sat with them for 6 days straight, didn't sleep, didn't eat, just kept mixing and brewing and praying. Her hands had gone still on the photograph. They died the same night. Thomas first, just after midnight. William at dawn. Clara's voice flattened. The town said I killed them. Said if I'd fetched a real doctor instead of using my grandmother's witchcraft, they might have lived. She looked up then. Her face was wet, eyes swollen. But what Daniel saw wasn't grief. It was shame. I ran, packed that chest and ran. Every town since then. I tell myself I'll stay. I'll start over. And every time, something happens, someone gets sick, or word gets around about the herbs, and I run again. Her mouth twisted. I've been running so long, I forgot what standing still feels like. Daniel sat with the words. Let them settle into the space between them. You don't owe me the whole story, he said. I know. Clara's breath hitched. But it's been sitting in my chest so long, it's gotten heavy. She pushed herself up from the floor, and her boot caught on the edge of the wooden chest. She stumbled forward, hands reaching for the stall wall, and missed. She went down hard. The dirt floor of the barn had been soaked by a leaking water barrel earlier that week. Where Clara landed, the earth had turned to thick black mud. It splattered across her dress, her hands, her face. She lay there for a moment, not moving. The photograph pressed into the muck beneath her palm. Daniel was beside her in 2 steps. He reached down to help her up, but she pulled away. Don't. She sat in the mud, dress ruined, hair coming loose from its pins, dark streaks across her cheeks that might have been dirt or might have been tears. She looked up at him with an expression he recognized, the look of someone who'd finally hit bottom and was waiting to see if the ground would hold. I can't save anyone. The words came out ragged. I couldn't save my husband. I couldn't save my son. I came here thinking maybe I could save this land. And now I'm sitting in the mud in the middle of the night like a fool. Daniel lowered himself to the ground beside her. The mud soaked through his trousers, cold and heavy. He didn't care. My wife died in that back room, he said. Ruth. Consumption took her slow. Over 2 winters. I watched her get smaller and smaller, and there wasn't a single thing I could do about it. Clara's breathing slowed. I blamed the land, the dust, the isolation, the way this place takes everything and gives nothing back. Blamed myself for bringing her here, for not selling when I had the chance, for every choice that led to that bedroom and that cough and that last breath. He picked up a handful of mud, let it fall through his fingers. Did it help? Clara asked. The blaming. No, ma'am, it did not. The lantern flame gave one final flicker and died. Darkness rushed in, broken only by moonlight slicing through the slat walls. Neither of them moved. Clara's hand found his in the dark. Mud-caked, trembling, cold. He held it without squeezing, without pulling, without asking for anything. I don't know how to stop running, she whispered. Then don't. Not yet. Daniel's thumb moved across her knuckles. Just stay still for tonight. Figure out the rest tomorrow. She didn't answer, but she didn't let go either. They sat there in the mud and the dark. 2 people who'd lost everything they loved, holding on to the one thing they hadn't lost yet. Dawn found them still sitting there, gray light creeping through the barn walls, dried mud cracking on their skin. Clara's head had fallen against Daniel's shoulder sometime in the night. His arm had found its way around her without either of them noticing. The photograph lay somewhere in the mud beside them. Thomas and William, their faces hidden in the dirt. Clara stirred, blinked, looked around at the mess they'd made. "I should clean this up," she said. "I'll help." She turned to look at him, and something in her face shifted. The shame was still there, but underneath it, something else. Daniel. First time she'd used his name without the mister. What happens when someone finds out about my past, about Virginia? He met her eyes. The question hung between them, heavy with everything she wasn't saying. What happens when the running catches up? Clara left the note on the kitchen table before the first light touched the window. The words had taken her 3 attempts to write. The first 2 lay crumpled in her apron pocket, ink smeared where her hand had trembled. The third said only what needed saying. "The land will live now. You don't need me for that. See." She didn't sign her full name. Didn't feel like she'd earned it. The carpet bag sat by the door where she'd packed it the night before. The wooden chest stayed behind, too heavy, too full of ghosts. She'd cleaned the photograph and propped it against the pillow on her cot. Let Daniel find it. Let him understand why she had to go. The door hinges creaked as she slipped out. She froze, listening. No sound from the back room. No footsteps on the floorboards. She walked. The road to Miller's Crossing stretched 3 miles through land she'd helped bring back to life. The south pasture, where clover now grew thick enough to see from the road, lay to her left. The fence line she and Daniel had strung together ran along the ridge, the posts still straight, the wire still taut. The cattle grazed in the early light, their coats finally showing shine. 14 weeks of work, 14 weeks of watching dead ground remember how to breathe. Clara's boots kicked up dust with every step. Her carpet bag bumped against her thigh. The sky brightened from gray to pink to pale gold, and still she walked. At the crossroads where the main road met the path to the Cobb farm, she stopped. A wooden signpost pointed east toward Abilene, west toward nothing but prairie. Someone had carved initials into the post years ago, JM plus EH. The letters worn soft by weather and time. A love that had lasted long enough to leave a mark. Clara traced them with her finger, wondered who JM and EH had been, wondered if they'd stayed or run. She kept walking. Miller's Crossing appeared over the last rise, a cluster of buildings huddled against the flatness like animals seeking shelter. The general store, the blacksmith, the stagecoach station with its peeling paint and hitching post worn smooth by 1,000 ropes. The ticket window was just opening when Clara arrived. The station master, a thin man with wire spectacles and ink-stained fingers, looked up from his ledger. "Help you, ma'am. 1 ticket east, Abilene. 75 cents. Clara counted out the coins. 3 quarters. Saved from the money Daniel had given her for household supplies. She'd meant to buy sugar with it. Had planned a pie for Sunday dinner. The ticket was rough paper, hand-printed in faded ink. She folded it once and slipped it into her pocket. "Coach comes through at 8, the station master said. About an hour. Clara found a bench outside the station and sat. The carpet bag rested between her feet. The morning sun warmed her face, but she felt cold inside, the kind of cold that started in the chest and spread outward. She thought about Daniel finding the note, reading her words in that empty kitchen, the coffee pot cold on the stove, the 2 chairs on the porch, one of them empty again. He wouldn't come after her. She knew that much. He'd read the note, and he'd understand, and he'd let her go because that's who he was, a man who respected choices, even the wrong ones. The hour crawled by in fragments. A dog trotted past, sniffing at her carpet bag. 2 men argued about the price of wheat outside the feed store. The station master swept the platform with a broom that had seen better decades. At 8 o'clock, the stagecoach appeared over the eastern rise. Clara stood. Her legs felt wooden, disconnected from the rest of her. She picked up the carpet bag, waited. The coach pulled to a stop in a cloud of dust and creaking leather. 4 horses, lathered with sweat, stamped and blew. The driver climbed down, a chaw of tobacco bulging his cheek. Eastbound for Abilene. All aboard. What's going aboard? The door of the general store opened, and a woman emerged with a young boy clinging to her skirt. The child's hair was dark and curly, his face round with the softness of early childhood. 4 years old, maybe 5. William had been 4. Clara's throat tightened. The woman lifted her son into the coach. He bounced on the seat, pressing his face to the window. "Mama, look at the horses, Mama." The driver opened the coach door wider. "You coming, ma'am?" Clara's hand went to her pocket, felt the folded ticket there. Her fingers closed around it. She thought about the cabin, the window Daniel had installed glass from Wichita, fitted into a frame he'd built himself. The way the morning light came through it now, falling across the table where they ate breakfast. The wildflowers he'd picked and put in a jar on the sill without ever saying a word about it. She thought about the porch, 2 chairs side by side, the silence that had become comfortable instead of empty. She thought about his hand finding hers in the mud, the way he'd sat down beside her without asking, without judging, without trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. The note she'd left said the land didn't need her anymore. But that wasn't the question. Was it? The question was whether she needed the land, whether she needed the cabin, whether she needed the man who'd given her space to grieve and time to heal and a window to let the light in. "Ma'am?" The driver shifted his tobacco to the other cheek. "Last call. You getting on, or ain't you?" Clara looked at the coach, at the woman and her son through the dusty window, at the road stretching east toward Abilene and beyond toward Virginia, toward the grave markers she'd left behind, toward the town that had called her a witch and a murderer. She could go back, face them, prove them wrong or prove them right. Or she could stay. The coach door hung open. The driver waited. The horses stamped. Clara pulled the ticket from her pocket, looked at it for a long moment, the rough paper, the faded ink, the 75 cents that could take her away from everything she'd built. "No," she said. "No, I ain't." She tore the ticket in half, then half again, let the pieces fall to the platform like dead leaves. The driver shrugged, closed the door, climbed back up to his seat. Clara watched the coach pull away, The woman's face appeared in the rear window, curious, the boy's small hand pressed against the glass, waving at nothing. Then the coach crested the rise and was gone, trailing dust that rose and hung in the still air. The station master came out and stood beside her. "Missed your coach, ma'am." "I know. Next one's not till Thursday. I won't be needing it." The walk back took longer than the walk there. Clara's legs ached. Her carpet bag grew heavier with every step. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the dusty road, and sweat trickled down her spine beneath her dress. But she walked. She passed the crossroads where J.M. had loved E.H. She passed the Cobb farm, where Silas stood in his yard and stared at her without waving. She passed the fence line, the posts they'd set together, the wire they'd strung side by side. The south pasture spread out before her, green and alive. The heifer lifted her head as Clara approached the same heifer that had been dying 14 weeks ago, now healthy, now grazing, now choosing to live. The cabin came into view over the last rise. Daniel sat on the porch, in Ruth's old chair, the one he'd never used until Clara came. His hands hung between his knees. His head was bowed. He looked up when she reached the fence. Clara stopped walking. Her carpet bag hung from her hand. Her dress was damp with sweat, her boots gray with dust. She must have looked a mess, a woman who'd walked 6 miles to run away and then walked 6 miles back. Daniel didn't stand, didn't move, just watched her. Clara set down her carpet bag, opened the gate, walked through. What would she say when she reached him? Daniel hadn't moved from the porch since dawn. He'd found the note at first light, the words written in Clara's careful hand on a scrap of brown paper. He'd read it twice, set it down on the table, walked outside, sat in the chair he'd made from his father's oak tree. The coffee pot sat cold on the stove. He hadn't touched it. The cattle needed checking. The fence line on the north ridge needed mending. The comfrey beds needed weeding. All the work that had given shape to his days for the past 14 weeks, none of it mattered now. None of it could make him stand up. Ruth's cup sat on the porch rail where Clara had left it last night. The one with the dented rim. Clara had been using it for weeks, and Daniel had let her. And now the cup sat empty, and the chair beside him sat empty, and the silence pressed down like a physical weight. He'd known she might leave, had seen the way she looked at the road sometimes, her eyes going distant, her hands finding that bare spot on her ring finger. He'd known, and he'd done nothing to stop it, because stopping it would have meant asking her to stay, and asking her to stay would have meant admitting what she'd become to him. So he sat and waited. For what? He didn't know. The sun climbed higher. The shadows shortened. The cattle called to each other in the north pasture, their voices carrying across the still air. Then he saw her. A figure on the road, small with distance, moving toward the ranch, walking slow, like someone carrying a heavy load. Daniel's hands gripped the arms of his chair. He didn't stand, didn't wave, just watched. The figure grew larger, closer. He could see the carpet bag now, hanging from one hand, the dust on the hem of her dress, the way her shoulders curved forward with exhaustion. Clara. She reached the fence, stopped, set down the carpet bag, opened the gate and walked through. Daniel still didn't move. If she was coming back, it had to be her choice, her feet carrying her all the way. He wouldn't make it easier by meeting her halfway. She crossed the yard, climbed the porch steps, stood in front of him, sweat damp and dust covered, her hair falling loose from its pins. "The stagecoach was going east," she said. Daniel's voice came out rough. "And you're facing west." Clara's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. "I got as far as the crossroads. Couldn't think of a single thing worth going back to." She paused. "Could think of a few things worth staying for." "A few things." "Don't push your luck, Mr. Carver." "No, ma'am." Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. "I wouldn't dare." He stood, walked into the cabin, came back with the coffee pot still cold and 2 cups. He poured anyway, handed one to Clara. She took it, sat down in the chair beside him. Their shoulders almost touched. The coffee was bitter and cold. Neither of them complained. "I saw the note," Daniel said. "I figured you were wrong. You know, about the land not needing you." Clara turned to look at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face streaked with dust and dried sweat. She looked exhausted. She looked beautiful. "The land's doing fine," she said. "I wasn't talking about the land." The words hung between them. Clara's hand tightened on her cup. "Daniel," she said his name soft, testing the shape of it. "I'm not an easy woman. I've got ghosts and baggage and a habit of running when things get hard. I noticed. I might run again. You might." He set down his cup, turned to face her fully. "But you came back today. That's got to count for something." Clara looked out at the pastures, the green spreading across what had been dead ground, the cattle moving through the grass, the fence line they'd built together. "I'd like to plant apple trees," she said. "Come spring. There's a spot on the south side of the hill that gets good sun." Daniel understood what she was offering. Apple trees took years to bear fruit. 5, maybe 6. Before you got a decent harvest. She was talking about staying that long. Longer. "I know the spot," he said. "Soil's deep there. Never been farmed." Clara nodded. Her hand moved along the arm of her chair, coming to rest near his. Not touching, just close. "I found the photograph," Daniel said. "On your cot. The one of your husband and son." Clara's breath caught. "I put it on the mantel, next to Ruth's." He paused. "Figured they might like the company." Clara didn't answer, but her hand moved the last inch, her fingers finding his, lacing together like they'd done it 1,000 times before. They sat like that as the sun moved across the sky. The shadows lengthened. The cattle came in from the pastures. The kerosene lamp in the window glowed amber as the light faded, lit by neither of them, burning since morning because Daniel had forgotten to extinguish it. 2 weeks later, a photographer passed through Miller's Crossing. Daniel paid him 50 cents to set up his camera on the porch. Clara wore her good dress, the blue one she'd made herself. Daniel wore his father's vest with the silver buttons. They didn't smile. People didn't. Back then. But something in the way they stood, shoulders touching, hands hidden but close, said everything a smile couldn't. The photograph went on the mantel that evening. Clara placed it beside the daguerreotype of Thomas and William. their faces finally visible. Looking out at the cabin they'd never seen, outside, the south pasture lay green and quiet in the fading light. The cattle grazed. The windmill turned slow in the evening breeze. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a coyote called, and another answered. Clara stood at the window, watching the land she'd helped bring back to life. Daniel came up behind her, his reflection joining hers in the glass. "Apple trees won't ship until March," she said. "That gives us time to prepare the ground." Her hand found his. They stood together in the lamplight, two people who'd lost everything and found each other anyway, watching the darkness settle over the Kansas prairie. The land remembered what you did to it. And so, it turned out, did the heart. There's a quietness that comes after a story like this one. Not the kind that needs filling with words or explanations, just a soft, familiar weight that settles somewhere in the chest and stays for a while. Many of us know what it feels like to carry something heavy for a long time. A loss, a regret, a door we closed and never opened again. Some of us have stood at crossroads and chosen to keep walking forward. Perhaps you've felt that ache of wanting to belong somewhere, anywhere, after years of moving through rooms that never quite felt like home. We don't always get tidy endings. Sometimes the best we find is a porch, a cup of coffee gone cold, and someone willing to sit beside us in the silence. And that's all right. Not everything needs to be understood. Some things are just meant to be carried a little lighter than before. If this story stirred something in you that feels tender or unfinished, let it rest. It doesn't need to be resolved tonight. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know.